Good. Can you hear okay? Okay, good. In the back you can hear too? Oh, I can hear that. That's well done. You know, this whole idea that the month of August, the band gets the Sunday off, but there's a couple downsides in that. One is you have to deal with me all Sunday morning, and there's no filter or cushion for any of that. And I'll tell you another downside is, and I don't know if you know this, except when before Jake went off to college, I brought Jake up here and I said, hey, every Sunday, without fail, Jake Logan sits up there and you know, makes sure that everything from a technological standpoint is going well. The praise band may have gotten the month of August off, but you know who did not get the month of August off? It's these guys upstairs. So, I feel like the most important member of the praise band, in fact, is clearly not me, but is very much our sound engineer. So Donnie, thank you so much for being here. And maybe it's just we're going to run over today, just know that. Okay. He's taking his shoes off, he's getting a cup of coffee. Last week was take your shoes off, right? Last week was take your shoes. I'm a week late. But part of, just so you know, the method behind the madness, because I know that you so enjoy the music. I know that when you come here and you see 12 and 14 pieces, and you hear, you know, the mandolin and the drums and the violin and the keyboard and the piano and the bass guitar and all the voices that we got up, it's just, it's like God speaking through music and emotion, right? And I know that it's different. I'll just say different when it's just me. And thank you, Moose, for being here this morning. They volunteer. I don't know if you know the praise band volunteers. And I demand, it's not a democracy, I demand 5 hours between rehearsals and being in church of them to volunteer a week. I also expect that they're practicing on their own at home to be good. So that's a big commitment, right? You know, to have a part-time job that pays you nothing, that takes 5 hours a week. And I prefer that the band be around for a long time and not to burn out. So this was their month of paid vacation because I can't pay them. So do this. When they come back next week and you see them, just tell them how much you've missed them and how much you appreciate them. We used to do band and music recognition Sunday, but they fought me on it pretty hard because they didn't like the attention. Strange that they stand in front of you every Sunday and give all kinds of attention. But it's something when you let down your instrument, you feel alone. Just so you know why the band gets the month of August off. We've been walking through the Old Testament, and there are these stories in the first half of our Bible that we remember maybe from when we were smaller, we were growing up. Moses, Abraham, Ruth, Naomi, Joseph and his brothers, his rotten brothers. The next one, the alternative pronunciation of the word job, Job. I don't know if you're familiar with the story of Job. It is a long book. That's why we're going to run over today. But I'm going to read you the first chapter, just so you see how it all sets up. And then we'll kind of go from there. So know that a day is coming, and that which you're wearing, your clothes, is going to be totally out of style. Some of you, 20 years ago, that happened. A day will come, and you won't be on this planet. A day will come when the flowers and the grass will wither, and it's all going to fade away. But that which we are about to read is eternal and forever. So I invite you to listen now to the Word of God. There once was a man named Job who lived in the land of Uz. He was blameless, a man of complete integrity. I'm not sure that there is anyone else in this room that can say it. right? In verse 1, we already realized that Job was unique, special, set apart. He feared God. He stayed away from evil. This is important. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters. He owned 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 teams of oxen, 500 female donkeys. He also had many servants. He was, in fact, the richest person in that entire area. Job's sons would take turns preparing feasts in their homes, and they would also invite their 3 sisters to celebrate with them. When these celebrations ended, sometimes after several days, Job would purify his children. He would get up early in the morning and offer a burnt offering for each of them. For Job said to himself, "Perhaps my children have sinned and have cursed God in their hearts." This was Job's regular practice. Not only was he righteous, he was trying to go before God and make sure that his children were seen as blameless as well. Now this is going to get interesting. You know, you don't hear me talk a lot about heaven and hell and angels and demons and the fact that there is this spiritual realm that is going on that you can't see. Maybe some of you can see, I can't see. So there's this conversation that's about to happen, and it's bizarre. Verse 4, one day the members of the heavenly court, that's in heaven, came to present themselves before the Lord, and the accuser, Satan, came with them. "Where have you come from?" the Lord asked Satan. Satan answered the Lord, "I have been patrolling the earth, watching everything that's going on." So just a side note, what does Satan spend his time doing? Patrolling the earth. He's not sitting down in a dungeon somewhere thinking about, boy, it's hot here. Patrolling the earth. Then the Lord asked Satan, "As you've been about patrolling, have you noticed my servant Job? He is the finest man in all the earth. He is blameless, a man of complete integrity. He fears God, stays away from evil." And Satan replied to the Lord, "Yes, but Job has good reason to fear God. You have always put a wall of protection around him, his home, his property. You have made him prosper in everything he does. Look how rich he is. But if you were to reach out and take away everything he has, he will surely curse you to your face." What is Satan doing?
Temptation.
He's good at that, right? All right. You may test him, the Lord says. Who does the testing in this? It's not God. "Do whatever you want with everything he possesses, but don't harm him physically." And Satan immediately left the Lord's presence. One day when Job's sons and daughters were feasting at the oldest brother's house, a messenger arrived at Job's home with this news. "Your oxen were plowing, with the donkeys feeding beside them, when the Sabians raided us. They stole all the animals, killed all the farmhands, and I am the only one who escaped to tell you." While he was still speaking, another messenger arrived with this news. "The fire of God has fallen from heaven and burned up your sheep and the shepherds." Pause for a second. I am the only one who escaped to tell you this. Pause for a second. Was it the fire of God?
No.
Who do we know already is doing the testing? Hold on to that. While he was still speaking, a third messenger arrived with this news. 3 bands of Chaldean raiders have stolen your camels, killed your servants. I am the only one who escaped to tell you. While he was still speaking, another messenger arrived with this news. Your sons and daughters were feasting in their oldest brother's home. Suddenly a powerful wind swept in from the wilderness and hit the house on all sides. The house collapsed, and all your children are dead. I am the only one who escaped to tell you. Job stood up, and he tore his robe in grief. And he shaved his head, and he fell to the ground to worship. He said, "I came naked from my mother's womb, and I will be naked when I leave. The Lord gave me what I had, and the Lord has taken it away." What does the next verse say? Praise the name of the Lord. In all of this, Job did not sin by blaming God. This is the word of the Lord. Have you considered my servant Job? God says. There is no one like him. He's blameless, upright, a man who fears God, avoids evil. Many of us would say Job had to endure a trial, right? No. Job was not on trial. You know who was on trial? God was on trial. That was the temptation. Oh, sure. Your people like to follow you, but that's because there's blessing. So there's this idea that Job was not on trial. He was on trial in this story. Later in the story, Job's got 3 friends. He's got 3 buddies. Even though his sons and daughters are dead, everything he owns is destroyed and dead. He's got 3 friends, and he's got his wife. And they all come to support him and encourage him, and all of them give him horrible advice. So, Job was maybe righteous, but not that smart. His wife comes in after all of this happens and says, you know what you need to do? You need to curse God and die. The opposite of what Job had actually done, right? We give her the benefit of the doubt. Remember that she was also grieving. Those were presumably her children. But Job's friends, they come in and they give him terrible counsel. And so the takeaway that I want you to think about, there's 2 takeaways today, and the second, we're going to work, but the second is, why do bad things happen? The first is, what kind of friends do you surround yourself with? Do you have friends who encourage you in the right direction? Or do you got the friends who gossip and let you gossip? You have friends who are quick to tell you what you're supposed to do. Quick, here's what your circumstances, this is what's going on. You say, well, my friends are good listeners. Look, just because someone is willing to listen to you and give you advice doesn't mean that they're giving you the right advice. And you say, but so-and-so, you know, they're godly, they're righteous, just like Job. I mean, they've got nice hair. They carry their Bible around. They go to church, they go to small group Bible study. And when they talk about other people's problems, they do it in such a way that it's like saying, well, we should pray for this person because of the gossip that we're about to share with each other. But if we say it's a prayer request, that's okay then, right? We need to pray for so-and-so because you know what's going on with them? We're fixing to gossip. That's what's getting ready to happen. Side note, there's a whole bunch of rabbit trails on this one. If someone is willing to talk poorly about someone else in your presence, what do you think they say about you when you're not around? The same thing. Yeah, but my friend goes to church a lot and Bible studies, and I should follow what they say, right? I should follow their advice. Can I tell you about someone who spent a lot of time listening to Jesus, following Jesus? A man named Judas. A man who later betrayed Jesus. Spent 3 years following Jesus every day, listening to Jesus, watching Jesus do miracles and drive out demons, doing ministry. Everyone thought of Judas as a spiritual, godly, we called him a disciple. People went to Judas and they said, can I ask you some advice? And the point of this is be careful about who you think is giving you advice. Be careful about who you think about giving advice to. I mean, have you spent more time at the feet of Jesus than Judas did? Are you closer to Jesus than Judas was? And you go, that's a straw man argument. Judas is just one person. It's just a small sample. All the other people in the Bible must have given good advice at the right time, right? Okay. The Apostle Paul, before he was named Paul, was named Saul, and he made it his life's work to imprison and persecute and execute the first Christians. Not great advice. Another disciple, Peter. Peter perpetually had this chronic condition called foot in mouth disease, right? Tried to talk Jesus out of the crucifixion. No, 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 no. You can't be crucified. Not quite understanding the importance of what God was really up to, the bigger picture, Christ's death on the cross for our rescue, right? The Apostle Paul, this is Galatians 5. This is going to be fun. The Apostle Paul gets a little bit upset. He's talking about some folks in the church, and he says, I wish they would go the whole way and emasculate themselves. You may want to Google emasculate later if you're not. Children, check with your parents. Here's one. Here's some advice that Jesus gives to you and to me. This is Mark chapter 9. And if your eye causes you to sin, tear it out. There's some advice from Jesus. And you say, but I'm not supposed to take that advice literally. Okay, I agree with you. I notice everyone here has two eyes. Why do we take literally everything else that someone gives us for counsel? If we understand the importance of taking Jesus in context, in Romans chapter 12, Paul says, I tell each of you not to think you are better than you really are. Use good sense. Measure yourself by the amount of faith God has given you. An important lesson, this is a takeaway in Job, is that he listened to the bad advice that he got from his wife. He listened to the bad advice he got from his closest friends. And then he made his own decision, which was against the advice of all of them. He sought, you see, to do what was the best thing, what was right in the eyes of God. He didn't give a darn about what they... Is that okay to say? That's okay, right? It's okay, thank you. He didn't give a darn about what others thought about his actions. And the teaching point goes something like this. There is comfort in getting the advice and the counsel of many, right? That doesn't mean it's the right direction. There is comfort in the counsel of many, but that does not mean it's the right direction. Just because a lot of people say, I think this is what you should do, does that make it right? I mean, how many people are still convinced that Elvis is alive? Too many, that's how. Just because people think something is right doesn't mean it. A quick Google search of Elvis is alive returns almost 11 million results, people. It's not just you, apparently. How many people, a lot is the answer, thought that the earth was flat before Pythagoras, or the 9th century Muslim astronomers, Aristotle 500 years later, most famously Galileo, tried to stand alone that the earth is actually round. Too many of us find comfort in the counsel of many, and we interpret that advice just because it might be numerous, or it might be what we want to hear. And it's just easier to listen to someone else than it is to look inside or to listen for the voice of God. And may I caution you, we're almost done with this point. May I caution you that anyone who delights in giving advice to you probably has ulterior motives in mind and not God's wisdom. The smartest, wisest, most discerning people I know never volunteer advice or counsel. Ever. And by the grace of God, I have met some really wise people. And I have got to sit down with them and say, can you please help me think about this? And you know what they do? They normally ask me a question. Someone who's quick to go, here's what I think you need to do. Here's the right thing. This is the way. I don't know. People who like to make noise might not necessarily be the voice of God. But I would like to share with you a quick story about the voice of God. my favorites in the Old Testament, in fact, we should preach on this soon, is Elijah. Elijah was a great prophet. And God wanted to talk to him. And God says, Elijah, go out and stand on the mountain. I want you to see me when I pass by. All at once, a strong wind shook the mountain, shattered the rocks. Think of the noise, think of the awe, think of the power. But the Lord was not in the wind. Next, there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And then there was a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. Finally, there was a gentle breeze, the still, small voice. And when Elijah heard it, he covered his face out of fear, respect, with his coat. He went out and stood at the entrance to the cave, and the Lord asked, Elijah, why are you here? And then it goes on to tell. So all of the loud, big signs that we might normally go, this is the voice of God. Does anybody have an idea about how quiet you have to be to hear a gentle breeze? You got to put on your cell phone. You got to take out your headphones. You got to turn off your car. And you go, you bagged on Job's friends pretty hard. And you haven't even really told us the advice they gave. Here's the advice of Job's friends. His life is destroyed, it's fallen apart. And the friends say, look, if there is suffering, if there is wrongdoing, if there is evil and pain and hurt in your life, then it must be because of some sin in your life. Let's talk about your sins. Let's confess your sins. That makes sense to us, right? If God is this cosmic judge, and we've done something for which we're guilty, then he's well within his rights to punish, to inflict, right? There's this idea that floats around in many churches, too many churches, probably this one, which is why we're going to talk to it, that if you are a good person, and if you try really hard to do good things, then good things will come to you. Right? Didn't we just read the story of Job? But we want that lie to be true. If I'm a good person, if I go to church, if I try really hard, then God is going to make good things happen. The life of Job tells us this is so far from the truth. Further, let's look at the life of Jesus. It tells us the very same thing. Job was a righteous man. Tragedy came to him. Jesus lived perfectly. Suffering and death came to him. So I encourage you, can I say implore? Because that feels more substantial. Let go of that lie. That if you try really hard to be religious, that it guarantees a good life will come to you. There is no guarantee of any kind anywhere. And if you go to a church that says otherwise, leave. Because it's going to mess you up. Because it's not a matter of if pain, suffering, and tragedy come to you or me. It's a matter of when it's coming. And can I tell you, it's coming. And if we've got tucked in our head this idea, I haven't been up here to preach in a while, that something bad happened because God inflicted it. What do we think of God? I think he's mean. I think he's a jerk. We think he doesn't care. We think he doesn't love us. Nothing could be further from the truth. I want to unpack this just a little bit because I feel like we struggle with this. And it makes sense in so many other parts of our world. If you get caught speeding through town, right, you're going to have to pay a speeding ticket. If you get drunk, drive through town while speeding after robbing a bank, run a red light, run over a fire hydrant, you're going to spend some time in jail. You will suffer. There will be a penalty. And we will all know that you were suffering because you did something wrong, and we will all know because this is Marathon. Remember last week? So many people thought there was something wrong with my social media last week. They were like, are you at Kmart? Or are you at Publix? Or are you at the Brass Monkey? You know? Case in point. Thank you, my friends. And we know that you will suffer and you will pay the penalty because you did something wrong. So we try and equate this in the spiritual world, right? It makes sense. It makes sense that if you do something wrong, that God will punish you. It makes sense except for this. It's totally wrong. This is bad Christianity. This is bad theology. This is bad for the image that we have of God, that you have of God. If you think that there is suffering in this world because God is a big, mean, big, angry thing that just rules out punishment, then very lovingly, I need to say to you this morning, you have not met God. You have no idea who God is. Because you've made mistakes, right? And you're broken. And you're flawed. And I would think that for as long as I have been trying to follow God, I would think that by now I would sin less. Anybody else think that? So God is clearly well within his rights as the cosmic judge to smite, O mighty smiter, as the movie says. You know, to strike down. You know, to say you have accumulated a debt that you can never pay. And what does God do? In the eternal story of good and evil, he says, I'm going to pay your debt. I'm going to love you. I don't know if you've ever been at a restaurant, you know, and someone picked up your tab. You know, or if you've done it. And you know what, if you can do it, if you've got 30 or 40 extra bucks, how many elders are here today for what I'm getting ready to say? Don't put it in the offering today. Go pay somebody's lunch tab anonymously. Go pay somebody's bill. Because you and I accumulated a debt of mistakes and brokenness and sin that we could never pay, and God says, I'm going to pay your tab. In fact, I'm going to send my son to pay the debt penalty that you owe me, so that you and I can be close, so that there can be nothing that stands between you and me, says God. That is the depth of God's love, which we will never understand, we will never fathom. And I also have to admit before you that at one point, just like Job's friends, I had the very same judgment theology, that suffering results from sin. And I was wrong to think this, and that's why I've spent so much time, because I don't think I'm the only one that thinks that suffering happens because you did something wrong. Being faithful to Jesus is the most difficult thing you will try to do this week. We will be faithful to our work. We'll be faithful to our mortgage. We will be faithful to our child's soccer practice schedule. Football, baseball, t-ball, whatever. We will be faithful to our favorite sports team and their schedule. right? Last night I'm telling the kids, shh. Pause. What? And if they were here, they would go, that happened more than once. We'll be faithful to helping out a friend in need, right? We'll be faithful to anything. Just don't ask us to be faithful to Jesus. Jesus is dethroned more deliberately by Christians than by the rest of the world. We treat God as if he were this machine designed only to bless and pour out. Give us the good times. If you had a child, and all you ever did was poured out blessing, and every time that child wanted something, you gave them whatever they wanted, what kind of child would you raise? A spoiled, entitled, worthless, in society child. What is God going to do with a bunch of spoiled, worthless Christians? He's not going to advance the kingdom. So suffering and trial and pain is going to come. And the hardest thing to do will be to stay faithful to Jesus. At one point, and forgive me because I memorized it in the King James, and I don't know why that is because I don't even like the King James. But Job's friends are walking him through this. If suffering has happened, it's because of sin. That's why God's trying to slay you. And Job says, yea, though he slay me, yet I will follow. Even if he is going to slay me, I'm going to follow him because there's nothing better. There's no better deal. There's nothing that's more true. There's nothing that's more loving. The goal of faithfulness is not so that we do work for God. And the blessing comes out. What's this thing that you in the casino video? Slot machine. Gotcha. The goal of faithfulness is that when we follow Jesus, which you've heard is difficult to do, then God is able to freely do his work through us. And I'll give you a hint, it's not in this room. It happens out here, and it happens out here. Because if suffering is going to come to Job, suffering is going to come to Jesus, suffering is going to come to you. You know who else suffering is going to come to? It's going to come to everybody else on this planet. And when we're faithful, we're able to say, I don't understand why there's pain, friend. But I know that there's a foundation that we could stand on, that we can endure any storm that comes our way. Man, I pray for you. Be careful whose advice you think is godly. Know that the storm is coming. It's coming to you. And the hardest thing is going to be to stay faithful to the one that loves you more than anything else on this planet.